up, all my fight fans? So we had ourselves a little bit of an interesting weekend. We had ourselves Nate Diaz versus Jake Paul. Finally, a fight that was been talked about for quite some time. A fight that's been talked about for multiple years. Finally came into fruition last Saturday night. So let's talk about it, shall we? So the fight kind of went personally what I expected it to go. It went down with Nate obviously showing off his cardio, Nate showing off that he can throw hands, that he can utilize some of his boxing skills that he has throughout the years that he's learned in the game. He wasn't necessarily a boxer. We all know this. He never really boxed before, but he's trained with a lot of high-level boxers, guys like Andre Ward and such. So he was able to show off some of his skills. He still went in there with that MMA boxing where he wasn't doing a lot of head movements. He wasn't necessarily bending down towards getting out of the way of the punches and such like that. He wasn't utilizing too much power shots. I know a lot of people are going to say, well, he didn't do any more power shots. He didn't show so much of his power. He had some power, but not a lot. If you really look at Nate Diaz was never really much of a power shot guy. He never really knocked out somebody with one shot. He uses a lot of combinations, a lot of accumulated punches that he likes to do. Throughout his fights to stop his opponents. Even when that great knockout that he had with Gray Maynard, it was over accumulation of punches. He got Gray Maynard hurt, and he was able to pretty much do combinations nonstop, follow him throughout the cage, and stop him later on in the fight. So that's what Nate Diaz did to Jake Paul. Jake Paul utilized some of his good boxing skills. You can see that he's actually evolutioned into a really good boxer. Not necessarily a great boxer or even a very good boxer, but actually pretty decent, I should say. Use that word decent to talk about Jake Paul. A decent boxer. Cause he actually showed some great footwork. He showed some jabs. He was able to catch Nate Diaz with a good hook and such like that. That was actually able to drop Nate Diaz. Nate Diaz, I feel like it was a little off balance, but it was still a really good shot. Really good shot. Got him on the temple. Messed up his equilibrium and pretty much was able to drop Nate Diaz. Moving forward with the fight, I do feel like it went to the right person, Jake Paul. Jake Paul landed the good power shots. He was able to stay in there. Nate Diaz pretty much turned up the heat later on in the rounds, and right there it showed a lot of maturity in Jake Paul. He didn't get pressured. He didn't crack under the pressure. He didn't really necessarily avoid his game plan, or pretty much just like abort his game plan, I should say. He pretty much stuck his ground, still was able to fight off some of Nate Diaz's combinations and utilize some of his power and such like that, and was able to get the victory, rightfully so. We all knew that Nate Diaz is a very much of a slow starter, so we knew that the earlier rounds was really going to go to Jake Paul, which it did. But Nate was still in it, a little bit here and there, but then in the late rounds, again, we knew what was going to happen. Nate was going to take over. And he did in some of those rounds, but still not enough to get that victory, especially with that knockdown in round 5. Well, with that being said, the outcome, again, definitely goes to Jake Paul, but you still got to give it up to Nate. First ever pro boxing fight against a decent boxer. Not a great boxer, not a good boxer, a decent boxer. And it was a very, very much successful night. I wish the promotion was just a little bit better. I would have loved to see some countdowns and possibly some, prime times, 24/7s that we would get on Showtime or HBO. But we didn't necessarily get that. And the whole promotion just really felt like there wasn't a whole lot of buildup, I should say. It didn't feel like a whole lot of buildup, But it is what it is. It still was a great night. It still was a fun fight. I enjoyed it very much. So, moving forward. I know a lot of people said earlier that Nate Diaz was going to get demolished by Jake Paul because what we've seen him able to do to guys like Tyron Woodley, Ben Askren, and even Anderson Silva. I always said, no, Jake Paul is a decent boxer, but trust me, Nate Diaz is a very, very tough, durable opponent, which he turned out to be. That Nate Diaz wasn't going to be able to stop Jake Paul, or Nate Diaz wasn't going to be able to handle Jake Paul, well, we all saw very much so, Nate Diaz was able to do it. Unfortunately, because of the inexperience in the boxing ring, and because of his fighting style, he wasn't really necessarily able to beat Jake Paul. I felt like he could have, but it just couldn't, because Nate Diaz is not, again, necessarily known as a power puncher. And because his pat shots, his little here and there shots, which is still good, but it really gave nothing for Jake Paul to really be scared of. It never gave nothing to Jake Paul like, oh my God, I can't do that again. Otherwise, his power is going to hurt me. And that's what gave Jake Paul the confidence to keep going, to keep coming forward, because he felt some of Nate Diaz's really good shots, and it didn't necessarily hurt him, especially in the boxing gloves. Maybe in MMA gloves it would be totally different. He would actually be able to feel that power a little bit more. But because you had the boxing gloves on, it still hurt, but not enough to where it was going to make Jake Paul back up. Now, Jake Paul, on the other hand, he did look really good. He looked really good, but again, this is not any kind of real strong criticism. It's going to sound like it, but at the end of the day, it was against a guy who is 0-0 or 0-1 now as a boxer. And he is known for his stand-up, but he's known as MMA stand-up. You see, there's a couple of different things in MMA stand-up. MMA stand-up, you are going to be able to utilize your shots and your punches and such, but you always got to watch out for the elbows. You got to watch out for the knees. You got to watch out for the kicks. You got to watch out for the ground and pound, or the takedowns. You got to watch out for all these different things. So you can't just move your head out of position because you're going to open your head for a leg kick. You can't necessarily duck down to get out of the way or duck under a hook, because then you're open yourself to a knee. You can't necessarily, just go nonstop moving forward without really utilizing angles, because then you're going to open yourself up to a takedown. There's just so many different things and so many different weapons that you have in MMA that you don't have in boxing, that boxers train for and that MMA fighters train for. So it's just literally apples and oranges. So moving forward, what's going to be next for Jake Paul? Well, Jake Paul is, I feel like his next fight should be against Tommy Fury. The only reason why Jake Paul took on this fight with Nate Diaz is because Nate Diaz was free of his contract, and the time was now. We didn't know if Nate Diaz was going to go back to the UFC right away, or maybe picked up by an MMA organization that was not going to allow him to fight Jake Paul, I should say. So the time was now, which was correct. It did happen, and now he can move forward. So moving forward, I feel like he definitely needs to go against Tommy Fury, avenge that loss if possible, and then possibly even go a part 3 if he just so happens to beat Tommy Fury, who's a very tough competitor, because Tommy Fury is equal level to Jake Paul, and Tommy Fury is about the same height. Tommy Fury is about the same size, so it's definitely an even playing field when it comes to Jake Paul. See, Jake Paul is definitely doing a really good thing regarding his MMA style, or not MMA style, his MMA fighters. Right now he's already beating all these MMA fighters, and he's making a really good name for himself, which is good. So if you really want to continue doing this, fighting MMA fighters and making good money, then absolutely. But if you ever want to be taken serious as a boxer, you're gonna have to go against actually pure boxers, not guys that train boxing but do a different sport, not guys that have maybe fought a few times and such. No, you're gonna have to go against boxers. And Tommy Fury right now is somewhat of a decent boxer, just like Jake Paul is. Of course, there is another YouTube star in KSI, but we all know that KSI and Logan Paul are actually going to be taking on each other later on in the year. So who knows what's going to happen with that. What's actually very much frustrating me regarding Jake Paul is that he keeps mentioning Canelo's name. It's like, dude, stop mentioning Canelo. Stop it. You went to a split decision with Tommy Fury, which is, again, good. Decent for you guys. But you guys are nowhere near ready for that upper level guys. You are not ready for the top 10. Definitely not for the number 1. You're not ready for anybody in the pound for pound rankings. You're not ready for any of these guys. You will be ready in about next 5 to 10 years, if that. Because you got to remember, Jake Paul just barely started taking this on 3 years ago, maybe 4 now. So Canelo's been doing it since he was a kid, well into his 30s. So Canelo could stop training now and take a break for 10 years, and Jake Paul would still not be able to catch up to Canelo Alvarez. There's levels to this game. Right now, Jake Paul is at the beginning level. Not even at the really, really good level. He's still at the beginning level. That beginning, barely breaking in amateur level. Is he fighting upper echelon guys, like, well-known guys? Yes. But don't get it confused with well-known popular MMA fighters to well-known popular boxers. There's levels. If you fought some well-known popular boxers and was able to do what he was able to do to some of these MMA fighters to boxers, that'll be a totally different conversation we'd be having. Totally different. But he hasn't. He won against one pure boxer who's never done anything else but box, and he lost. Split decision. He says things went wrong, etc., etc., etc. during that training camp. Everyone has excuse. We all do. Don't matter. Win, lose, or draw. You got an excuse for something. It happens. It's the fight game. You never go into a fight perfect. So there's a potential rematch going to happen later on in the year, hopefully. But he's also talking about Nate Diaz in an MMA fight. I highly recommend he doesn't waste his time with that. Don't even waste your time. I get it. It's a build up. I get it. You're going to make a lot of money and such like that, but you are going to get dominated. I feel like Jake Paul against any MMA fighter that's well known for his grappling as well, it's just going to get dominated. That's it. You need to fight a pure striker. I feel like, and don't take me wrong for this, but I feel like it would be a little bit different against Conor McGregor, because Conor McGregor is well known for his striking. Conor McGregor isn't necessarily known for his grappling. Conor McGregor isn't necessarily known for his wrestling. Do I feel Conor McGregor will still dominate Jake Paul in an MMA fight? Absolutely. But he's not going to get taken to the ground. He's not going to be wrestled with, and he's not going to try any submissions. They're going to stand up. On the other hand, Nate, he's going to go in there. He's going to utilize some of his reach, utilize some of his striking, get you to the cage, get that head, that guillotine that we saw him do in the boxing match, and pretty much choke you out. I know Jake Paul said, like, oh, I'll just pick him and slam him. Sorry, it don't work that way. Just like, MMA fighters like, gee, why didn't I think of that? Oh my God, you know what? He has me in the guillotine. All I got to do is pick him up and slam him. Wow. Hey, we found the cure. We found the remedy. Wrong. Don't work that way. Does not work that way. Sorry, but it don't. So I highly, highly recommend Jake Paul. Do not do that. Stick with boxing. Go for that rematch against Tommy Fury if you want to be taken serious as a boxer. You're taken serious as a businessman. You're being taken serious as a very good or a very decent athlete, but you have still been yet to take it serious as a boxer, because you have only fought one boxer and you lost to that boxer. And that boxer isn't even a very good boxer. He's a very decent boxer. Levels to the game. What's going to be next for Nate? Well, Nate is somewhat entertaining the idea of an MMA fight, only because, of course, he knows that this fight ain't going to last a round. I am going to utilize my ground game. I'm going to trip him. I'm going to take him to the ground, and I'm going to have my way with him. I'm going to do my ground and pound. I'm going to submit him with the guillotine. I'm going to submit him with the rear naked choke. I'm going to use a triangle. I'm going to do anything I can, because that's what Nate Diaz can do to Jake Paul realistically, where it doesn't matter if you have some kind of wrestling game that in high school. Doesn't matter if you train a few kicks here and there in the boxing gym. It does not matter. Levels to the game. Nate Diaz has been doing it well into his teen years and well now into his 30s. Again, take off all this time away from MMA. Nate Diaz has forgotten more stuff about MMA and about grappling than Jake Paul will ever learn in his life. Just not possible. Not possible. So, but it's easy money for Nate. Easy money. So, but as far as that goes, there's all these talks about him potentially going back to the UFC in a potential fight, the potential trilogy with Conor McGregor. Sign me up for that. Sign me up for that, because I want that fight for sure. I always wanted that fight, but it's actually very smart that Nate Diaz did not fight Conor McGregor for the third time, because now he has a little bit of an upper hand going back to the UFC. If Conor McGregor, who knows, there's a lot of stuff going on with Conor McGregor, but if this fight does come into fruition, Nate Diaz knows, like, hey, you guys want this fight, I want this fight, Conor wants this fight, so let's make this fight happen. Let's make a big payday, and that's what's going to get Nate Diaz a big signing contract, because his name only blew up more. His name only got bigger. Nate Diaz did not lose against Jake Paul. On paper, he did. On records, he did. But to us, to the fans, we all knew it's a boxing match. That's what we've been trying to tell Dana White for all these years. Like, dude, let these guys go out and box. They're not going to lose fans. They're not going to lose records. They're not going to be like, oh, you got stopped by Jake Paul. Like, who cares? He didn't get stopped, but it's still a boxing match, not an MMA fight. Be different. If it was an MMA fight and he got choked out, then, oh, yeah, your stock went way down. You get stopped by a guy who's never really done MMA? Come on. No. That's when his stock will go way, way down. So that's also another potential thing that Nate Diaz has to really pay attention to. That Nate Diaz really has to focus on. Like, okay, there's a 99.9% chance you will beat Jake Paul in an MMA fight, but do you really want to risk that $10 million, maybe even $20 million, that 0.01% that you might get caught by Jake Paul in an MMA fight, kiss goodbye your MMA career. Nobody's going to sign you for any kind of big money. You get stopped, you get knocked out, you get tapped out. Somehow, some miracle happens where Jake Paul is able to do that. His MMA career, as we know it, will be over. I'm talking about Nate Diaz. So there's a lot for him to think about. I recommend he goes back to UFC, of course, because that's where the real money is at. It's always been. There's a lot of big fights we could see. That Jorge Masvidal rematch, that Nate Diaz, that Conor McGregor rematch, possibly even the Leon Edwards for a title rematch. So much we can see with Nate Diaz. So guys, let me know what you think is going to be next for Jake Paul. Let me know what you think is going to be next for Nate Diaz. Let me know what you think is going to happen with these guys and what you think of the fight. Let me know in the comments, guys. Like, subscribe, hit that notification button, and I'll see you guys in the next video.